Today is an unusual day for a couple reasons. Of course, because it's, annual meeting Sunday. It's an unusual day, and that changes what we talk about. It's unusual because we're not going to be really analyzing a section of Scripture today like we normally would. We're going to look at one, and then we're going to talk about a topic that's discussed in it. That's not something we often do. But it's a section of Scripture that we have broken down before. It's in Acts. I don't know if you guys know, but you have to turn this on in order for it to work. I just thought I'd let you know. In Acts chapter 2, now listen, if you have hung around the church any length of time, you have heard this section of Scripture. You might even have it memorized. You've heard it so often. It's kind of the model for the church. And since it's annual meeting Sunday, we're going to talk about the church. So let's take a look at this little section in Acts chapter 2, starting in verse 42 and going to the end of the chapter. They, that is, the newly formed Christians, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and signs were being performed through the apostles. Now all the believers were together and held all things in common. They sold their possessions and property and distributed the proceeds to all as any had need. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple, and they broke bread from house to house. They ate their food with joyful and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And every day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Let's stop there and pray. Lord, today as we think about your church, I pray that you would open our eyes, our hearts, and our minds to what we need to know so that we might be a church where we are seeing people saved every day. How we thank you in Jesus' name. The church exists in two ways. The church exists as an organism and as an organization. An organism, of course, is a living, breathing thing. Often it can be a collective of living, breathing things. I'm not sure if you're aware, but your body as an organism is a collective of a number of living things. An organism exists that way. An organism can be living and growing and improving and becoming stronger, or an organism can be dying and weakening and fading away. The church exists as an organism, and it also exists as an organization. An organization is in this case, a group of people who have come together for a common purpose with a common set of goals to achieve a specific thing. McDonald's is an organization, a group of people who've come together to sell however many billion burgers they sell every day to make money. The church exists as an organization, people who work together, accomplishing goals. The thing about an organization is that if people are not working together and they are not accomplishing goals, it's not going to endure. The organism of the church, the life of the church, hangs on the organization of the church. If you will, the organism is the muscles that get things done. The organization is the bones that give them something to pull on. This morning, we're going to talk a bit about the organization that is the church. Pardon me. Yeah, well, we are. It'll still be morning. When we get to the annual meeting, we'll be talking about the organization. But here this morning, here, we're going to talk about the organism that is the church. And in order to understand a little bit about the organism, we're going to use an acronym that is common to describe this little section of Scripture and to describe the way the modern church operates. And the acronym is WELL. You might have heard this before. If so, that's great. Lindsay's like, yeah, Dad, I've heard you talk about it too many times. This is the acronym. I didn't make it up. I don't know where it came from. I really like it. We're going to break it down today. We're actually going to break it down backwards. WELL stands for worship, evangelize, learn, and love. And we're going to break it down backwards, taking a look at this little section of Acts and understanding a little bit about how the early church worked. And we're going to start with the concept of love. And when we talk about love, particularly in the New Testament, we are talking about agape. You know, that Greek term agape. Remember, the Greeks had many different words for the concepts of love. Agape is one that really didn't come into popular use until the New Testament was written. Agape is the highest form of love. This is a giving for the sake of giving. This is a giving that says, because of my love for you, I pour out my life for you, expecting no return. This is the kind of love that we read about in Philippians chapter 2, that we just recently studied. That Christ, who is God high above, didn't consider his godliness something that he should cling to, but for our sake set it aside and poured himself out and became a man. And when he took on the form of a man, he went even lower and became a servant. And when he became a servant, he went even lower and became a slave. And as a slave, he went even lower and surrendered himself even to death, the worst kind of death the Romans could come up with, death on a cross, for our sakes, expecting nothing in return. This is the kind of love that we're talking about. This is the kind of love that we see talked about here in Acts chapter 2, where it says, verse 44, now all the believers were together and held all things in common. They sold their possessions and property and distributed the proceeds to all as any had need. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple and broke bread from house to house. That's a really loaded section, and it's led many to think, well, the early Christians must have been communists, living in a commune, sharing all things. No, that's not really what's being described here. And if you read a little bit more of Acts, you'll see what happened. Basically, the way it worked was, if there was any need in their midst, the church met the need. Now, this was really important. Do you remember John chapter 9, the story of the blind man? He'd been blind from birth, and Jesus came and healed him. And because Jesus healed him on the Sabbath, the Pharisees were all upset about it and said, that's work, and you can't do work on the Sabbath. And so they tried to get Jesus in trouble by putting the blind man on trial. Do you remember this? They bring the blind man into court, and they say, tell us now who healed you. Now this was a big deal, because the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the temple police and the chief priests had let it be known all through Jerusalem that anyone who said that Jesus was the Savior, the Messiah, the Christ, anybody who said that would be excommunicated from the synagogue, would be removed from the synagogue. We don't really fully understand this concept. We're like, oh, so they couldn't go to church anymore? Huh, tough on them. Guess they got to stay home and sleep in. No. That's not what we're talking about. To be removed from the synagogue was to be removed from Jewish community. And remember, this was a collectivist society. They depended on one another for everything. To be removed from community meant you no longer had any connection with your family members of any kind. And this is in a time where multiple generations lived together in the same house and depended on one another. You didn't have any of that anymore. You no longer had a job. You no longer could trade goods. You no longer could work in your business. All of your economy was completely cut off because nobody in good Jewish society would have anything to do with you anymore. It was worse than dying. At least if you died, they would remember you and say nice things about you. It was as though you had been completely erased from existence as far as the Jews were concerned. And the Pharisees, who ran such things, were so opposed to our Christ that they said anybody who admits that Jesus is the Christ, that's what's going to happen to him. So they call this blind man in, and they say, what happened to you? And he said, you know what? I honestly didn't see the guy. That's fair. So they called his parents in, and they said, is this your son? They said, yes, he is. Was he born blind? Yes, he was. How was he healed? I think they probably knew. But they said, he's old enough, ask him. They didn't want to answer, because if they answered what happened, they would be removed from the synagogue. It was that big of a deal. It was such a big deal that when the blind man said, you know what, I think it was that man Jesus that did it, they said, you're out of here. And Jesus went and found him later, had to go look for the guy, found him and comforted him and consoled him because of what had happened. That's how big of a deal this was. It did not get any easier just because Jesus rose from the dead. It actually got much worse. It didn't get any easier because the Holy Spirit came on Pentecost. It got much worse. The church started in Jerusalem with good Jewish people. For them to say Jesus is the Christ, which of course is required for membership in his church. For them to say that meant that they were removed from society. They had nothing. If they were a widow, it wasn't like they could just go pick up a job. They were completely dependent on their family and community. All of a sudden, they had none of that. If they were an orphan, they were completely dependent on family and community. They had none of that. And an orphan can even be an adult who has received no inheritance. They got nothing. They got nothing. No way to compete, no way to buy food, nowhere to live. If they were a businessman, they just lost all of their business connections. Do you see what's happening? Do you see what they had to give up? This wasn't just a lifestyle choice. Well, I think I'll be a Christian. Like you might say, well, I think I'll drive a Honda now. No, this was turning their world upside down. These people started coming to the church. They were willing to sacrifice everything in their lives to know Christ. And they had nothing. But there were some people in the church who had properties and goods and these kinds of things. One of the men that's mentioned by name is Barnabas. He owned a piece of property on an island where he was not currently living. He sold that property and brought it in to help pay for other people. The Romans became very concerned about Christianity in the first 200 years of the church, very concerned of it, because it was growing fast and strong, and they thought, is this a movement that will try to overthrow the empire? And so they sent people to investigate, two kinds of people. They sent Roman soldiers who would show up in their whole garb and say, tell me what's going on here, and interview people. And then they sent spies who would come and infiltrate the church, acting like they were really interested in the things of the church. And then they would go report to their commanding officers, and we have documents of those reports. And the thing that they said about these Christian people, the thing that was so attractive about the Christian people, that was causing other people to flock to the Christian people, sacrificing even their lives to become a Christian person, the thing that was so attractive was that they loved one another. They loved being together. They got together all week long. They were constantly eating. We still do that. We're going to do that in a little bit. They were constantly eating. And the reason they were constantly eating was because some people didn't have food. So let's get over to my house for dinner tonight. I've got enough. They were constantly taking care of one another. One particular report we have says that this particular spy saw a man come into their meeting who brought nothing to eat, and so another man willfully chose to go without so that that man could have food. Blew their minds. For us, we're like, well, yeah, duh. No, this was revolutionary. They loved one another. They loved being together. They sacrificed for one another. They took care of one another. I got to ask, how are we doing on that? How are we doing on that? Honestly, I don't think we're doing too bad here at Mount Vernon Church of the Nazarene. I think the Church of the Nazarene in general does a pretty good job. We do all pool our resources. We do care for one another. I have to be honest, I was a little bit disappointed this year when I started seeing the financial reports come through because, we gave significantly, but we just didn't give as much as last year. We do a pretty good job. We take care of one another to a great extent, but we're a pretty private group of people, us in this congregation. We don't really tell people when something's wrong. We just kind of try to deal with it ourselves. But the cool thing is when we do find out something is wrong, we jump on it. Let me give you an example. This last year, Alicia Hill ended up essentially homeless. Her and her two boys. She didn't do anything wrong. She had a house that was being built for her and it wasn't done yet. And it was running late. Imagine that. And the apartment she was living in said, well, we're gonna take the apartment back. We want to do something different with it now, so you got to get out of here. There was nowhere for her to go, her and her 2 boys. So the Hodges said, well, you come stay with us. The Hodges do not have a big house. I can imagine, and Levi indicated, that this was a sacrifice. But that's what you do, because you love one another. I would just imagine that if we really made this our practice, that if we were excited about being together, that if we were eating together all the time, that if we made a point of being with one another on a regular basis simply because of how much we enjoyed being together with one another, if we sacrificed for one another in this way, that people would be saying, what's going on down there? And the Lord would be adding daily to the number of those who are being saved. We love. We also learn. This is key in the church. We learn. This is one of the reasons that you all brought me here pushing 6.5 years ago, was because you told me in a board meeting that we had that you didn't feel like you were learning from the Scriptures. And you heard that I liked to teach, maybe talk too much, and so you brought me here so that you could learn. This was a key part of the early church, by the way, parentheses, love this picture. Look at these 2 guys right back here. Oh, you can't see them with the light. See these 2 guys over here in the corner? See, these 2 guys over here are teaching. They're teaching. They're telling people. These people down front, oh, they're listening. It's great. These 2 guys back here, what's he saying? I don't know. I love that, because that's how it actually is. We learn together. We get together, and this was a basic part of the early church. Think about Stephen, the Grecian Jew, who stood up and schooled the Pharisees on the Old Testament. Think about Jesus walking with the 2 men on the road to Emmaus, and they were like, oh, woe is us. And he said, really? Let me tell you about the Old Testament, and explained it to them. Think about Philip stopping, another Grecian Jew, not trained in theological things, stopping with the man from Ethiopia and explaining to him Isaiah chapter 53. These guys knew their Bible really well, and they knew how to put it together. And where'd they get it from? They got it from the apostles. They were devoted to the apostles' teaching, it tells us on here. The apostles were teaching them regularly. Where'd the apostles get it from? Did they go to Bible college? No. In Acts chapter 4, Acts chapter 5, it tells us that the Pharisees took note that these were men who had been with Jesus. They learned it from him. They told it to others told it to others told it to others, and they learned. Now listen, we live in the information age. You can learn anything you want in 2 or 3 minutes by Googling it. I can't guarantee you it's going to be accurate, but you can sure learn it. Back in those days, these people didn't have access to knowledge like this. They needed to know. Nobody would ever tell them. All of a sudden, somebody's telling them the truths of life, and they want to learn. They were meeting together every day to learn. I got to ask, how are we doing? I struggle with this. You realize you guys are paying me to teach you, right? You're not paying me a lot, but you're paying me to teach you. And for some of you, it's a real sacrifice, what you pay me to teach you. Paying me for this. This is not free. And so on Sunday mornings I teach through the Bible, and on Wednesdays I teach verse by verse. On Wednesdays we really break it down. You told me you wanted to know. We really break it down. We started actually 6 years ago now in Matthew. We just finished Philippians. We're going through verse by verse. We're learning as much as we can. Are you taking advantage of it? Are you really taking advantage of it? Are you learning and growing? Do you know more now than you did last year at this time? I know that not all of you can be here on Wednesday night for the verse-by-verse study. If all of you were here on Wednesday night, we'd probably launch another day and add it to that as well. I understand that. You know it's available for you online. And many of you access it online, and I appreciate that. You know the best way to learn is to teach. Can you take what you are learning and teach others? Can we do it like they did in Acts over here? Can we just have some folks over for dinner and talk about it? Can we just have some folks over for dinner and just listen? People say, well, I don't want to be a small group leader because I don't know how to teach. Well, guess what? You already have it. You paid for it already. It's available on YouTube. Don't like me? Fine. There's some good stuff out there. I mean, there's guys that I have listened to on the radio for over 20 years and still do. John Corson, Gary, I got Gary started on John Corson. Alistair Begg is another really good one. T. Scott Daniels has archives online. He's one of our general superintendents. He's a great guy, fantastic teacher. There are some really good guys out there that you can listen to. And there are lots of ways to learn. I wonder if we were talking to some friends one day, and they indicated that they had questions about life. And we indicated that we don't have all the answers, but we got some answers. We heard them on Wednesday, or a Wednesday years ago, or when we were listening to the radio earlier. And maybe that person would like to come over Tuesday night. We're going to have spaghetti, and we'll talk about these things. I just wonder if the Lord wouldn't add daily to our numbers those who are being saved. That is the basic, by the way, that is the basic church planting model that has existed for 2,000 years, that has been successful to plant and grow churches all over this planet for 2,000 years. Your friend has a question. You might know where the answer is. Let's get together and talk about it. Are we learning? The next one, evangelize. Oh, I know this is a scary one because this means you have to get up on Saturday morning and put on a three-piece suit and walk around door to door and knock on the door, and when the poor guy opens the door, you have to say, do you have a minute to talk about Jesus Christ? And then when he slams the door in your face, you have to put a big smile on and go to the next place. And then also, you have to go to the Seahawks game, not because you're interested in football, but so that you can hand out those little comic book tracts, as many of them as you can, to everybody that you see, because that's evangelism. No, that is not the truth. Evangelize comes directly from the Greek word evangelon, which is the term that we say gospel or the good news. Evangelon, the good news. We have the good news. Think about Philip. Remember Philip? He did the whole deal with the Ethiopian. What did he do next? The next place we see Philip is in Samaria. Now, Philip was in Samaria because he was hiding. Philip had a wife and 4 young daughters at his house. The Jewish leaders began persecution of the church, and they were looking for the church leaders, and they knew Philip was one of them. And Philip saw what happened to James, and he said, I got to get out of here. And so he took his wife and his 4 young girls, and he went to the one place he knew the good Jews would never follow him. He went to Samaria, because they wouldn't get Samaritan dust on their feet. He went and hid. When he got down to Samaria, he undoubtedly had to find a place to rent. He undoubtedly had to find a place to work. I don't know what his trade was. I know he had one because he was Jewish. He had to find a way to ply his trade in such a way that would earn him some income so he could feed his 4 young girls. The people there in Samaria said, what are you doing here? First of all, we don't have Judean Jews in Samaria, and you're a Grecian Jew? What are you doing here? And he said, well, I follow Jesus, and there's some folks that don't like that. And they said, you follow Jesus? Why would you do that? And he said, you haven't heard the good news? And they said, wait a minute, there's good news? And he said, yeah, your life can have meaning. Your life can have meaning and purpose, and it's not just getting up every day and going to work and punching the clock and come home and get exhausted and get up and do it again week after week after week after week. And it's not trying to find a way to please God and somehow earning it good enough so that maybe God will be happy with you. He loves you, and He came for you, and He died for you, and He wants to have a relationship with you. And that's what life is all about, and it's so much better. And this is the good news. Haven't you heard the good news? And they said, why no? Tell me about it. And church broke out in Samaria. Massive revival. Nobody ever expected it to happen. Billy Graham didn't go there. Philip was just telling his neighbors the good news. How are we doing? Are we telling people the good news? Do we even believe it's good news? It is the best news ever. It's such good news. We'll tell people anything. Anything that happens, we'll tell them. Anything that's good that happens, we'll tell them. We'll tell them about a new TV show we saw. We'll get all excited about a new guitar. Anything. There's a car accident out on the street. I think one guy got hauled off in an ambulance. We'll tell them. Are we telling them the good news? The people we work with, our neighbors who are next to us. Listen, everybody is broken. Everybody is broken. I heard a guy say the other day that somebody told him he didn't want to be a Christian because Christianity is a crutch. And he said, well, if you had a broken leg, wouldn't you want a crutch? I'm broken. I need a crutch. Everybody is broken. You've heard it said before, we need to live like Jesus died yesterday, rose this morning, and is coming back tomorrow. It's good news. And we need to make sure people know. This is not some strenuous activity of trying to force people to be Christians. This is telling them the good thing that we have discovered. That Christ loves them and gave His life for them, and they can know Him for eternally. And then finally, we worship. We worship. What does it mean to worship? Worship means to tell something what it is worth to you. I've heard that a couple of people in here sometimes watch football. I don't know why, and I don't know much about it, but I do know this. At the final playoff game to determine who would go to the Super Bowl this last year, it was the Chiefs and the Dolphins, and they were playing together on a very cold day. At the beginning of their playoff game, it was minus 4 degrees Fahrenheit. At the end of their playoff game, it was minus 27 degrees Fahrenheit. And the stands were packed. People sat there in these stands for between 4 and 6 hours, getting colder and colder and colder and colder. After the game, they started going to the emergency rooms with frostbite. Some 70% of the people that came to that game got frostbite so bad that they are facing amputations because they wanted to go to that football game. That is worship. That game was worth so much to them that they were willing to lose fingers and toes to be there. That is worship. Telling that game what it was worth to us. And this has been a hallmark of the Christian faith since the very, very beginning. Seriously, the Sunday after Christ rose from the dead, the people got together in worship. You know what they did there? 4 basic elements. 4 basic elements that they did in worship. We still do them to this day. They sang songs, they prayed, they gave, and they learned. Same thing we do now. Now, some people say, well, and then they did communion. Okay, that was also an element, but to them it was much more than just an element of the worship service. That was worship to them from the very beginning. When we worship, when we consider Him, when we go to sing for Him, we stand in awe of Him. The idea is we stop and we consider who He is, and we're just blown away. What does it mean to stand in awe? Well, I was thinking about it. There is not a man in this room who at some point between 14 and 20 years old did not find himself looking at the most beautiful human creature he had ever seen. And he just stood there in awe. And if she came up to talk to him, you guys know what happened. Doesn't matter how educated you are, how smart you are, you can have an IQ of 250, and when that beautiful creature comes up to you and says something like, "Would you please get out of the way?" you just go, because you've never seen anything like this. I was talking to a guy the other day. He'd never been a big Corvette fan, and then they came out with the C8 Corvette. It was all he could think about for 6 months, till he finally went and bought one. I don't know what makes girls stand in awe of anything. Was Bath and Body Works or something? I don't know what girls, you'd think I'd know. I've had enough of them around in my life, in my own house, that I would have figured this out by now, but I don't know what really gets their attention. Maybe you can relate to standing in awe. Bacon? Is it bacon? When we think of Christ, when we think of who he is and what he has done, when we think of the beauty of Christ, we sing songs like, "I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned unclean." I stand amazed. This is worship. And this is one we really struggle in. Because half the time, we don't even come. I know it's Sunday and I probably should go, but man, I'm tired, and it was the time change. Plus, there's this game on TV. And there's something I wanted to do later. And also, there was this place I really wanted to go to lunch. And I know if I don't get there early, it's going to be too crowded. And so maybe not this week. Maybe not this week. And then if we do come, I was talking to a guy yesterday. Was it yesterday? Friday. I was talking to a guy, and he was telling me that he's an older guy, and he's gone to church all his life, and he's been to a few different churches as he's moved across the country. And he told me about this one particular place where he went to church, and they got a new pastor, and he really liked the pastor. The pastor was a really nice guy, and they connected really well. But he said when he got up to preach, it was so boring. He said, as a young man, as a teenager, he said, I looked around the room and I could tell that everybody in the room was just waiting for it to be over. Can we just, how often? And then we say, I don't like those songs. I don't like those songs. Well, I don't care. We're not singing for you. You're not the one who's supposed to like them. Christ is supposed to like them. Really interesting thing about singing in the Bible. You know that angels don't sing, right? I'm sorry, I hate to... Boy, I just got a couple people gave me this look. Angels don't sing. In the Bible, angels don't sing. They talk a lot. They say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." They say these things. They say, "Glory to God in the highest and peace on earth and goodwill to men," but they don't sing. You know the only group that sings in the Bible? The redeemed. Those that God has purchased. Those are the ones that sing. They are so overjoyed with what he has done for them that they sing in worship. It is worth it to them to embarrass themselves by singing, even songs they don't like, because they want to give that to him as worship. I just wonder if people showed up here on Sunday morning. They came because they saw us loving one another. They came because they wanted to learn. They came because somebody told them the good news. I wonder how they would respond if they came into the worship service and saw that the people in the worship service were absolutely in awe of this Christ. I think that the Lord would add daily to our numbers, because they would see that we're taking it seriously. They would see that we are an organism that is living and breathing and healthy and strong, all because we are empowered by our King. In the book of Zechariah, Zechariah the prophet is trying to encourage the leaders of the people to do some very difficult things. And the leaders of the people feel weak and incapable. And they not only feel weak and incapable, they feel dirty. They feel unqualified. And so Zechariah comes to them with a word from the Lord, and the word from the Lord is, not by your might, not by your power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. Don't trust in what you can do. Trust in what He can do. And that's what I have for you this morning about the church. And I hope that, like me, it's caused you to consider your position before Him, our collective position before Him as His church. This is His church. This is the outpost of His kingdom that He has entrusted to us. And what He's looking for us to do here is just that: worship, evangelize, learn, and love.